partners who it is their duty to serve and protect. And I know that I know following this discussion, there'll be additional discussions into the cost analysis and whatnot of the, building up an internal police department. My concern is, as we move forward, this is, for point of clarity, this would be a more permanent contingency plan, if you will, so that the district isn't, you guys are absorbing some of the startup costs.
I think I'm absorbing a lot.
Right.
The county commissioners are for us, and they're good with it. What I would say for you to consider, and Todd and I would disagree, and we can talk about it, is get a one-year commitment, and then there's a great likelihood I could repurpose those people in the future. We could find better jobs for them. But for me to hire them, give them a job, a couple of them are moving here, they want to work for the sheriff's office. Everybody we're hiring wants to work for the sheriff's office, and that we are doing some things internally to give some people some opportunities. But as large enough as we are, as 1,000 employees with different types of job duties and responsibilities, that wear green uniforms in many different categories. I think, in fairness to these people that want to come work here as an SRD2, is that I can't let them down, and I can't spend money to buy things that they're not going to use in the future. It's just not good fiscal responsibility for me to do it. If you do a one-year commitment, you have some redundancies at your schools for 10 months. That's the number up there. I'll do the best I can do as gives me SRD2 as I can, but that's going to be up to this 5-person board's decision. If we don't, I'll have to do 14, 80-20 split all the way.
Okay. Mrs. Goodwin, thank you.
Well, I realize that, and I think those are real issues, but talk about our charter schools again. What if they would like to make a long-term commitment with the Sheriff's Department for an SRD2, and some of them are very frightened and very concerned right now about their options, both from a cost standpoint and from a safety and security. They are required, as we are, to have an officer in every school. We have 11.
Or a guardian.
Yeah, we have 11 charter schools. I have heard secondhand, not firsthand, but I've heard secondhand that one said, "No, thank you, we don't need that." I don't know, we're using Wackenhut or what options they have, but they were going to go their own way. But I do have others who really are very, very concerned. So would there be some way that they might work with you all, with the SRD2, if there was some?
And that's a great question, because we work with them intimately. Marissa is in contact with them daily. I know some of them are here today. Yes. We have a consortium of them. They come and meet with us. They are on training right now. We believe that all of them are pretty unified on what they want individually, and so we know what they want. Okay. 3 of them will be getting SRD2s. I don't believe I've heard, unless Paul, you heard something differently. I know you talk to them regularly, and Marissa does regularly. I haven't heard any of them say that they want a long-term contract beyond this year. They'll probably stay in the Guardian program. If I'm wrong, Paul, I mean, you can just, if I'm wrong, let them know.
No, that's correct. And I think that's kind of what the sheriff's trying to do is serve both of those. So those 14 are the 12 elementary schools in unincorporated Sarasota County, with 2 as backup, as that substitute when someone can't make it that day. But along with that, we have those 9 others. So we're trying to serve 21 public schools in unincorporated Sarasota County. So the sheriff's asking the board here to provide us with a contract that locks in that for this school year for 180 days to ensure those 12 elementaries in unincorporated Sarasota County have a certified, trained law enforcement officer on them.
And if you want to replace them, and that's what I'm asking. I know Todd and I are going to differ on this, is that if you don't want to make a year commitment, I'm going to stop I'll use the SRD2s what I need for the charters. I will stop my hires on the rest of them if you don't want them, but I'm going to have to do 80-20 split on 14 deputies, and you need to be aware those deputies are not budgeted, and they will come off the street.
Do we have any questions? Mrs. Brown?
I think in order for us, we can't make, I personally can't make this decision now. I haven't seen an update, as neither have you, on where we stand with setting up our own. So, I mean, it's like, I'm not ready to vote on that yet. I need more information. The other thing is, could you explain what the Guardian, I mean, I know there's a lot of people that are looking at this to see, and I mean, you and I know what the Guardian program is,
Yeah.
but that's not law enforcement, but you're giving special training to staff?
It's a wonderful program, to be quite honest. I think we just got yesterday, Kurt, I can't remember the numbers, how many, 19 counties or 12 counties are using it?
Yes.
Polk, Duval, Hillsborough, or, a blend over in Polk. And what I worked with, talked to the sheriff over there about, the design was that the sheriff purchases everything, the equipment, and works with the district on the hiring. And the district owns the employee, but the sheriff is responsible for the training, equipment, radios, everything for that employee that is on those campuses. And that's what Polk is doing. Pinellas is doing it. Pasco's doing it. Duval's doing a blend. So it's not, as I tell people, I jokingly say, the vision is it's not this teacher who you have trained to go in and teach the kids and be around the kids with a 357 Magnum on her hip. That's not, they're exempt from the program. They can't be used. It's illegal to use the teachers. It's your ancillary people that are on the campuses. I would say a lot of your civilian security would be the ones identified. But what they did in Polk, and what I have is we worked, the sheriff and I are friends, and is a program where you would design the job description, and that person would be cheaper than a cop, wouldn't be a high-risk pension, and the sheriff would pay for all of their equipment and would be responsible for training them, like we're doing now with charter people, and that I would have bought them uniforms or BDUs and a shirt that would, whatever the agreement with this board would have been, and I would have absorbed all those costs.
Mrs. Zucker, I know you. I want
But
to.
I think the perception, Caroline, is, these are teachers and stuff. They're not teachers. They're
I understand.
yeah.
But they're also
But
not.
do you want Kurt to explain the law on it? And
No, I read the law. I read what was required. I am not happy with using the Guardian program.
That's fine.
I don't want any armed people that are not trained officers in our schools.
yeah.
That's bottom line. Don't want it.
I'm good with that because I'm on the hook because I'm the one responsible for science. So, I like the program personally, but I'll be quite honest with you. When I sign those things, I'm the one exposed. So, but I know this district didn't want to do it, and that's fine. But so we're back to where we're at with this board, where if I'm going to hire SRD2s and that cost level, I would say I would need a 1-year contract. And as you build out your police force next year, when we reevaluate the contract, it gives us time to repurpose those people into other job duties and responsibilities and not just terminate them.
Don't you think we need to have a discussion with our police department, Sarasota and Northport, before we agree to this component?
So,
Are we going to lose you at some point?
Well, you better believe it.
hold on.
I don't do well at board meetings, but yeah, I got another meeting. I got a 2:30 with judges and stuff. So, but certainly, I would say as you build out your force, I would do it systematically and cautiously, and you give yourself a little bit. You give yourself a little breathing room with a 1-year contract. The police departments can reintegrate. Remember, I don't have labor. So these SRD2s, I can move them. We can move them quicker and move them into a new position, but I'm not going to hire them and terminate them in 7 months.
Sheriff Knight, for point of kind of hinging off what some of my board members said, and I also know you have to depart, and I appreciate the time. What would be a time frame as we move forward in this discussion? I know our timeline is very short. So, with this offer, as the board continues, if this is something, what would that timeline look like?
I would think and hope that you guys could have this dialogue when we get out of here, and you guys will beat that down and figure it out what you want to do as a board. And all I would say from the sheriff's office side is, I won't hire people and terminate people.
Correct.
It's not fair to them.
No.
And it's not fair to buy the equipment. And they watch this, so they've been calling us. And we've called these people up who are retired cops. We have some retired Sarasota police officers that want to come wear the uniform and come back to work. And they're committed, but they're anxious. Mm-hmm. And are we or aren't we? Are we or aren't we? So I have a responsibility out of principle to be fair to them and let them know before we bring them in and start training them. And we're right around the corner from the critical crisis intervention training. So maybe, and I know it's not cheap, but maybe it gives you a little bit of breathing room if you do the 1 year, and then we can neutralize or mitigate how many patrol deputies or how many of my law enforcement division deputies I got to pull out of the communities to backfill the schools. And if you started to chip away and you got through Northport and Sarasota, you chip into where we're backfilling, yes, but I would definitely need a year commitment on the SRD2s.
Okay.
Or we'd have to do all deputies.
Okay.
Fair?
Mrs. Brown? I understand, yeah.
I know there's a lot of questions that he's had, and maybe some of them will be answered in the overview that the superintendent has provided. I mean, I would like to, kind
Move
of
forward.
into
Mhm.
that.
I'm fine with
so
that.
Rather than bring up all the
I just wanted
questions,
to
start
yep.
answering them.
Absolutely. If we can continue then to move to an update on where we are to kind of integrate some of the discussion. Yes, I have to add.
Yeah, and maybe you can stay and watch part of it and have some of those.
No, we watch on TV. We're good.
But I want to conclude. Isn't that great that you can do that?
No.
But thank you,
Yeah, one
truly.
thing I will leave is, like you said, Shirley, is it's better for us to talk than to them to talk for us. And so thank you for the opportunity, and we're doing the right thing.
Thank you very much. Truly appreciate your partnership.
Colonel Hoffman? Art's gone until Monday, but I'll have him call you Monday morning.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, go ahead and pull it.
Yeah, that should go.
Give a moment, and then
Mr. Andreas, if you want to make your way to the podium. Ms. Corcoran?
we'll move to special presentations, the development of the Sarasota County School Police Department overview and budget.
You got it? Yeah. All right. Yeah, should be all good. All right.
And I have a couple too as well.
Yeah.
I promise you.
Oh, geez.
Are you guys done with us? Cities as well?
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I mean,
You guys don't need us?
What time?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Have a seat. Mr. Barwin, welcome. We are going to continue with our board meeting, so if everyone could either take a seat or take your conversation out of the chambers. Mr. Barwin, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the city, thank you for the invitation to be here today.
Is your mic on?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Tom Barwin, City Manager, City of Sarasota. On behalf of our city and Chief DePino, thank you for the invitation to be here today. You've had a difficult problem to work through. It sounds like you've made a tremendous amount of progress. We in the city value our relationship with the school district, and we look forward to improving that partnership as we move forward. I'd like to change gears just for a brief minute. Because I'm going to tell you about something maybe you're not aware of, but I'm sure you will not be surprised. But since Marjorie Stoneman, our city has had the opportunity to work on several occasions with some of your fine students. Since Marjorie Stoneman, they have organized several special events in the city. They have worked professionally with our city staff to adhere to the rules of the city, and they've carried those special events off flawlessly. I've been so impressed with their innovation, their honesty, their creativity, and most importantly, their concern for our community and the schools for the long run. And that's what I'd like just to talk to you a minute about. I've met with them most recently in the last week when Gabby Giffords was here. Last night, as you may have seen on the news, the Parkland students visited Sarasota, and your students were there with them. And, their behavior is exemplary in every way. But what's really impressive is they're talking about the bigger issue. I know we have been focused on this small issue. But let's not lose sight of what's happening in our culture, in our society, the sort of devolution we're going through, the quality of life decline, when we have to provide armed officers in elementary schools, taking resources away from your primary mission. The students don't find it acceptable. I don't think most of us as policymakers find it acceptable. So my appeal to you today as policymakers with the ability to influence our state policymakers in Tallahassee, in Washington, D.C., to at some point spend some amount of time talking about the bigger issue or individually attempting to advance us into a safer world. As a former police officer who has attended to gunshot victims, as a city manager with over 3 decades of experience who reviews every firearm incident in our city, I think the public really doesn't understand the proliferation of firearms that is out there, how many are becoming lost, how many are stolen. It's just not acceptable. So, just some simple things to think about. We need comprehensive, universal background checks before an individual buys or owns a gun. This in no way conflicts with the Second Amendment. We need strict rules about the storage of guns and firearms in the home and when transporting weapons. This in no way conflicts with the Second Amendment. Equally importantly, and we face this in our schools, military-grade assault weapons need to be strictly limited to military personnel and highly trained police personnel. They have no place in our society. Our young people should never fear having to go to school. And you've heard it, we've heard it. Not acceptable. Let's start putting our eye on the horizon when we can eliminate these contracts and get back to allowing our custodians and our gardeners and our cooks and our school teachers and our parents to be confident all of our kids are in a great, thriving environment. We just have to keep working on it. The students are providing the leadership. It's time for us policymakers to catch up and support them with, I think, their vision for future generations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. But, say again? Yes, of course. If our chiefs would mind coming up to I say podium, it's not a podium, the microphones and seats. Thank you for joining us. Want to go around and do introductions? So for everyone watching, although I know we would know who you are.
No problem. Bernadette DePino, Police Chief in the City of Sarasota.
Welcome.
Chris Morales, Interim Chief, Northport Police Department.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Did you want to move to the next item?
Yes, and so at this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to our Executive Director for Public Safety, Mike Andreas, and Mitzi Corcoran, our Chief Financial Officer, will be supplementing once you have questions, but I believe Mike has a prepared presentation for us, and we can allow that to flow into questions from our chief and from the board, if there are any. Mike, the floor is yours.
Absolutely, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here, happy to have this opportunity, and I'm encouraged by what I heard today. So what I'd like to say is, we've had some really outstanding meetings with the 3 law enforcement professionals you have in front of you. I've met with them face to face, and they've been particularly supportive and particularly helpful. So I just wanted to publicly thank them and their personnel from those agencies to make sure that this is a success, and it will be. So as we move forward, I'm going to go through this presentation. Some of this is a little bit hard to read here, so I will go over it for you to discuss some of that. So on May 15th, we moved to start our own law enforcement agency. Just roughly 44 days ago or so, and we are well on our way to achieving that. And there are a lot of, I heard some issues come up today about operational concerns. All right, can you all hear me well now? Good, okay. So we are well on the way to achieving our goal. And as you heard today from the Sheriff's Department, you heard last time we had a meeting, there's support there now. And as I said, I'm very happy, and I think we're moving forward in the right direction on all fronts to get this thing done, to get it done the right way, which is what we're going to do. So the goal here is to significantly enhance the security and law enforcement services of the overall school district and individual school sites. And so what do I mean by that is we are creating a systems approach. I know you've heard me talk about that before, but a systems approach gets us to a place where we can holistically protect the entire district. And so That gives us the ability to collaborate. It gives us the ability to synthesize information. It gives us the ability to get ahead of those kinds of incidents that happen that we heard talk about at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and those kinds of things. So I tend to move around a little bit. I'll make sure I'll try to talk into the mic where we are. So our police department will be organized around information. And let me just say that our agency will need to collaborate with all of our partner law enforcement agencies. We can't do it alone. And then there will be law enforcement partners and there will be non-law enforcement partners to make this a success, to protect the school district. And that's what it's all about. And from our standpoint, we will always be 100% collaborative and participative. That's our goal and that's what we will do. Okay, so I think that we need, one of the benefits of our police department in the overview is to make sure that we're versatile enough to hit those issues that we heard come up today. And it's about connectivity more than it is about boundaries, working together, okay? So we have a 2-year implementation plan. You can see this here on the left side of the screen. It's the 2018-2019 school year. And you just heard the discussion that was relative to the contract and those kinds of things. You can see here it says we will continue with existing partnerships with our local law enforcement professionals, and it lists some particular schools here. And then there are some contingency contracts for the elementary schools we're looking to put in place. So our internal police department will serve 21 elementary schools or wherever we land up with the negotiations for different responsibilities in different schools. And our department staffing for year 1 will be 1 chief, 3 sergeants, and 24 officers, and a bookkeeper to help us with that piece. Responsibilities that go along. And then the 2019-2020 school year, we continue with existing partnerships for the City of Venice, Venice High School, and Venice Elementary. And then our internal police department will serve all remaining schools. 22 elementary schools, the 4 comprehensive high schools, the 8 middle schools, and the other schools you see listed at the bottom there. Ultimately, we'll end up in a place where we have 1 chief, 6 sergeants, and 44 officers.
Before you leave that slide, just in our conversations with Northport, we made them the same offer that we made in Venice, which is the flat fee of $65,000 per officer. And so we have an agreement for 18-19 in which we're going to do cost sharing, but we will this year make a decision as to what 19-20 looks like. They're evaluating our offer to stay in those schools at a flat fee identical to what we're doing in Venice.
And so in the future, I'm very happy, or even now, if we want to
And
discuss
you're just
some.
talking about middle and high school when you're talking about that? You weren't talking about elementary schools?
Sorry, yeah, I was going to ask.
That is correct.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Okay. So as we move forward, we can talk more in-depthly and more broadly and deeply about what it means and what our police department will do, what our goals are. But for now, we'll stick with this, and then I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So personnel staffing, we have a conditional offer with the chief of police. And we are working through what you see up here. We've had, for the police sergeants, we had 52 applicants. We have 3 offers that have been made and have been accepted in our sergeant positions. We are at a 33% diversity rating, and we have 13+ average years experience in law enforcement just for the sergeants there. Our candidates that we look like we're going to make offers to here very shortly to round us out, to get us to a place where we need to be, have an average of nearly 21 years experience. They're not newbies. They're officers from each of the departments you see here. They're officers from the sheriff's office. They're federal agents. They come from inside the county and outside the county, so they are very well experienced, and many of them are already SRO certified and trained, firearms trained, various instructors, instructing certificates come along with those officers. So they're not newbies that we have to get trained, and it goes through that 180-day cycle.
Mr.
I'm not sure who I'm supposed to ask. I'm kind of trying to put both of this. I know Mayor Shelley, brought up diversity, and that was a big issue to her. And you mentioned that we have diversity. Will you be taking that diversity into account when you assign the deputies to the relevant schools?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Addressed.
All right, so year-to-date for the school resource officers, we've had 116 applicants that you can see there. We have 15 offers made right now, 4 pending, and we're at a 37% diversity rate with that group. And they have, as you see here, nearly 21 years of law enforcement experience there. So you see some other numbers there. 66% of them are already FDLA certified. 37% are in the EOT training as we currently speak. And then there's a very small number that are, we have to get them into the EOT training. So we're working very well in a very comprehensive and energetic way to get them to the training and the certifications that they need. So
I have
Mrs.
a
Brown.
question on that.
Sure.
So the officers that we are hired are currently FDL certified. They are officers.
So many of them are FDLE certified already.
And the other ones will be?
Yes,
So when
they have to be. Yep.
when we have people out there telling, other that we won't have law enforcement officers, that's not accurate.
Yeah, so
They will all be law enforcement officers.
They have to
Yes,
be.
yes.
Yes.
And so the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is very clear on what the criteria is, what we need to have for our officers. And so they need to be FDLE certified. And so they will be. They're full-fledged, trained and certified law enforcement officers with the power of arrest and do all the things that professional law enforcement officers can do. So yes.
And for those that aren't currently FDLE certified, how long will it take to get the other ones certified? And will we hire them before they're certified or certification pending?
So there's a very small percentage of them that will need the equivalency training. And so that EOT training is held at community colleges around the state. Some of them are in a week-long course and others are in the 2-week course. And so several.
It's a 1 to 2 week course.
It depends. Yeah, some of the colleges run it for 2 weeks. It's 10 days, or some of them have a compressed course where it's 40-hour week, and then they have to take the state exam to pass that.
Just so you understand, those are experienced law enforcement officers from out of state. So they did not go to a Florida academy. So if you're wondering how in the world can you get certification in 10 days, it's because these are certified law enforcement officers from out of state who are just earning their Florida certifications.
Point of clarification, because I know that came up actually in the last meeting, and I was under, it was stated it was 180 days.
That's a new officer generally. That's a
New officer.
That's a new officer out of the academy kind of requirement training. It's
Yeah,
not.
I'm looking at you guys because you're the experts, so, okay, very well, okay.
That's not a, like the superintendent said, an officer that has 20, 30 years on the job somewhere else, and they come to Florida and say, here's my training. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement evaluates that training, see if it meets their very stringent criteria, and then they have to go into that EOT training, take the course, and then they pass the test.
And are any of the candidates not FDLE certified? You said a small number. How many
Yeah.
is that?
I'd have to look at it, but it's.
Okay.
I think
I'll do the math, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Chair, if I
Yeah,
could
please do.
answer your question on that 180 days, I'll give you a perfect example of that. You can hire a law enforcement officer. When I was in corrections for the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, they hired me on. I had within 180 days to enter the academy, to go into start the academy. So that's what the
Okay.
FDLE is talking about. You have 180 days to get that person hired on and get them within the police academy.
Okay, thank you.
That's work. Yep.
Thank you.
So many of these officers come to us from inside the state of Florida, and they are already certified in a number of critical areas for training purposes: defensive tactics, driving, you name it, use of force, OC spray, firearms instructors. They already have those certifications and blessings from the state, so when we hire them, we can use their expertise to help us train our personnel and get us to where we need to be. All right, so the background investigation piece is obviously a major component of our hiring process. And so right now we have two vendors under contract to help us with that process.
Can you, because I know members of the board were not at the June 12th meeting, can you state who I was under the impression it was one vendor, so can you identify who those are?
We upped that to 2. I'd have to get you that information, their names. I don't have them. It was them, and now we've reviewed.
It's included in some of your supplementary material when we get to that.
Yeah.
Just for a quick reference, it's Lemieux and Associates, and What was the other? Oh, I have it on my chair. Hold on, I apologize.
So we,
I think according to the math, it's 5 people. 5 people on it.
Sounds right.
Third, 15, 5.
And the other one here, capital protection and investigation.
Capital Protection Investigations is the other one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so through that process, we have those 2 vendors under contract right now. So when we make an offer and the officers sign the waiver, and we have them do that initial questionnaire, we can turn around and hand their complete information, their application, off to the background investigation vendors. And they will take that, carry it from there, to include scheduling a polygraph examination, the psychiatric testing, and our offices will go through medical testing on their own. It'll bring that FDLE required form back to us completed to the proper standards.
And how long does that take, the whole background investigation?
So you always get asked this question, and so it's not like painting a house where you can plan it out for, I'll have your house done in 4 days. A background investigation, depending on what we come across in the background, may take a little bit longer, or it may be abbreviated. So if an officer spends 30 years or 20 years at a particular agency, then that background investigation should be relatively short, and we should be able to get to it pretty quickly. If an officer moved from place to place or had a couple of changes in his or her career, that investigation will take a little bit longer because we are required to go to each of the law enforcement agencies where they worked before, where they've applied, and there are different standards. There are particular standards that FDLE requires. So the answer is sometimes it'll be short and sometimes it'll be longer. I can't tell you that. I can say on average how long a background investigation takes for a professional law enforcement officer that's been at the same location, the same place for a number of years. We can have it done, hopefully. Again, there are unknowns with that, within a week, 2 weeks.
May I, if I can defer to the chiefs, just because you have a diverse background and your experience typically hiring and background checks, that cycle is an average. Chief DePino, if you don't mind.
He's accurate.
So-
It depends on the
so there is no-
the applicant, and it depends on how quick you can schedule the appointment, whether the applicant's available to come in for the different testing, whether they get you materials.
Okay.
So average about 2 weeks. It should take you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sorry. Miss-
Before we offer jobs to these people, does somebody Google check them?
So
so we don't find some embarrassing information, up front, or before we spend all of this money on doing background checks?
So the short answer is yes.
All right.
And so it behooves us to do those kinds of things. And we also, before we make an offer, we call their references that they list in their application. And so the references that are in their HR application that come to us, we are contacting them and interviewing their references before we put anything, even before we put a conditional offer on the table. Okay? All right, so there's what you see here in the background investigation slide, the reference check, criminal background check, definitive drug test, polygraph, all that stuff is sort of the major elements of this piece. So training and certification, I spoke to that a little bit already, that a number of these officers already have a number of these certifications under their belt. Many of the officers who have been around for a while will have all of these certifications under their belt. So we are planning on leveraging those personnel. Okay. So the CIT training in this area, is really happy to hear the sheriff support and talk about his support for this initiative. The CIT training, the sheriff has one of his lieutenants is the CIT instructor for Sarasota County. There's going to be a whole lot of agencies looking to get officers inside that course. We will need to get our officers in that course as well. It's being run out of the academy, and so there'll be a group effort. There'll be Sarasota, Venice, Northport, and Sarasota County School Police Department personnel in that course in July, at the end of July. So, go ahead.
I have one more question on training.
Sure.
Yeah, this
Before
could be
you
more
go off of
workshop
that,
session. Works better.
we've got all the ones needed, for the active shooter to intervene and for the safety. But what about the softer side of the SROs and the training that our current SROs have had?
CIT that's the mental health component of it.
It's not the active shooter. The active shooter is something.
Yeah, CIT is the social emotional part of it.
Okay.
Which is required.
All right, thank you.
The bill.
You would think active shooter would be a crisis.
Yeah, the title, crisis intervention, you would think that shooting would be a crisis.
Yeah. And so that is a major part for us, and so everyone understands. It's not about, and I don't think anyone in this room will tell you that, putting an armed person in a school makes the school safe. And so it makes the school safer. But you have to insert that person in a way very broadly and very deeply to make sure that those officers can connect with the school community in a very meaningful way. And that is one of the big benefits of having our own personnel. We heard some language today and talk about, who's in control of them sort of thing. It's not about control. It's about sharing information and getting there where we need to be and being in front of these investigations. So it's much more than just hiring our own personnel and having them in the school, and armed personnel. It's about connecting and understanding the whole mental health piece. I keep saying it broadly and deeply and get ahead. So when we have these investigations that happen after hours, our officers should know who the friends, the social groups, and be able to connect with the other, the person who sent that threat out or whatever it may be in a very quick way so we can get ahead of it. And these incidents don't stop when someone talks to that person. So someone makes a threat, they go in there, they judge them. Look at how many examples that you see on the national news where the FBI has gone in and interviewed someone, and then they say the FBI was watching them for whatever reason for a long time, and then that person commits an atrocity. So our purpose is to make sure that we can connect with our populations in a meaningful way. So our tagline, and something I believe in completely, is that for us, the number one characteristic for our officers and our personnel is integrity. It all starts with integrity. If someone can discern between right and wrong and choose the tougher right over the easy wrong, that's where it starts. And we are service-oriented. And then, of course, we have very high standards of excellence. And I don't mind standing here, and I think particularly with the partnerships that we have, we need to think and act anew based on what's happening in the world today. And so just one of the things that comes to mind to me is Henry Ford once said that, if you asked my customers what they wanted when I was building the automobile, they would have said faster horses, right? So we need to think about how we can do things anew and work together to make Sarasota County exceptionally safe and get to a place where we have a national model. That is our publicly stated goal. No shortcuts, no cutting edges, collaborativeness, working together in new and innovative ways. So you can see here some of the officers, what the cruisers will look like. We've decided to go with Ford Explorers for a number of reasons. Number one, they're smaller and they simply fit on our campuses better. So here's some of the capital pieces here. So we are purchasing 7 Ford Explorers in 8 gently used vehicles from Northport PD.
Mike, can I interject real quick on that?
Absolutely.
Just to be clear on that part, because I have my mayor here and my boss, city manager, sitting behind me. That is contingent upon commission approval, which is next month.
Okay.
Which would be probably the second reading in July. So I don't see that being a problem, but if all goes well, that would be an option with, of course, those 8 vehicles. And they are very good condition, and we are willing to work with the school board on making that purchase, if, of course, again, contingent upon my commission's approval.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
And
Mr. Robinson.
why, we have Matthew Curry in Sarasota. Why Bartow Ford?
Because Bartow Ford stocks the police edition of the Explorer, whereas local dealers do not, and they had the state bid. And so you had to go where the cars were available and where they could be purchased. And so Bartow Ford actually has a back lot where you can go buy a police car.
I can answer that, too. I deal with fleet for my agency, and he's absolutely right. There's only certain dealerships in the state that actually hold the state contract and to have a fleet department in their dealership. So
Concerned about local business.
we would go, and just so you know, we do use our local businesses for recalls and stuff like that. Matthew Curry for
Yeah, they like that.
So you can see on that slide how we will assign those vehicles to the chief, the police sergeants, some floating officers, and then the sedans when we get them. how they'll be allocated out, and then, of course, how we move forward in 2019, 2020 on there.
So if you look at that slide, just to reconcile back to your last board action, it is 7 new vehicles, 8 gently used, hopefully gently. There's 2 additional vehicles that are not assigned to the police department, but are part of the staff in the Department of Safety and Security. And then the last vehicle that you authorized was a box truck, and it had nothing to do with school safety security. It was just part of the authorization. So there was some misinformation out there that we were buying $500,000 worth of police cars. That was not the case. We bought 7 new cars, 8 used cars, 2 vehicles for staff, and a box truck for the purchasing department to distribute materials, just so you can reconcile back to your last action.
Was there another action where we contract with someone to outfit the vehicles too?
Bless you.
Isn't there a cost for that?
Absolutely. So when we get into the cost, it's not just what you pay Bartow Ford. Bartow Ford will do the striping, but there are radios and equipment. One of the advantages, if we're fortunate enough to buy from a local department, is sometimes that equipment's with the car and it decreases the cost.
Mrs. Brown.
I know that there was I believe it was a grand jury investigation into the Palm Beach School District's police department, and one of the findings that they had that they were, came down on that school district about was that they did not outfit their officers with decent vehicles. I mean, they cited the condition of the vehicles and some of the other equipment that they had, that, they were trying to do it on the cheap, and they cited them for that. I think that's something that we need to look at too. I mean, we can't just do it on the cheap. I mean, because, we have to have it.
And that's why we sided with both a mix of new and used. But as you see, we are talking about 15 vehicles for a force that will approach 50. But it is a benefit in talking to some of our local law enforcement people, is that the ability to have a car is attractive to the officers. A car parked out in front of a school is a deterrent, just its physical presence there. And so the purchase of the 8 was really a number that we needed to reach. But if there's opportunities to go beyond the 8, particularly at the prices that we're talking about buying used fleet, because those elementary officers we've not assigned cars to, but putting a used car on an elementary school campus, they're not like a regular officer who's spending their entire day in the seat of the car and they're putting hundreds of miles on it. It's really a deterrent on the campus and even somewhat a benefit. So you may see us come back to you at a later date and say, hey, Northport actually had 12 cars, and we've said we needed 8, but there's 4 more, and at the prices that they're offering, why wouldn't we seize on this opportunity? But we'd come back to the board at that point in time. Chief?
I was just going to echo what the superintendent says. There is a distinct advantage to having a marked vehicle in front of a school. You know that there's a police officer there. It's a deterrent. It also can be used to block traffic if necessary. So in the future, it is something I would recommend that you take a look at, making sure all of your officers have that. Plus, they can respond quicker when needed. So there is a benefit. So I'm just echoing what you're saying.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, Mrs. Goodwin, I apologize.
Well, I'm just going to make a comment that in traveling around and talking to other school districts, some school districts are looking at putting just a car on campus that won't be used at all, but is a former, an older police car just for that purpose. They won't be engaging or using it at all. And I think one of our northern counties was looking at doing that just
I have
recently.
heard that as well. So being cost effective. But we don't want to. Michael, if you want to
So
continue.
it certainly gives us a great visual deterrent for those who are scoping out a school, thinking about doing something in a school, and you never know where the officer is there, but that visual piece is enormous. But having the ability to use it for different events that we have in the district, having a vehicle at every campus gives us great utility as a department. All right, so here's a updated comprehensive budget update. So you can look at those. These are some of the, and these are included in the documents. I think they're at the back of the room there. And it gives you the startup cost, where we are with personnel, officer equipment, operating expenses, capital equipment, and then, of course, our computer equipment. to do this thing right. So of course, we have a lot of the stuff up front that we have to fund, but we're starting our own law enforcement agency. So a lot of this stuff is not going to go away year after year. So of course, we have these upfront costs to do it right.
Mrs. Brown.
Our CPA didn't catch this, but I did. On the capital column, either one of those numbers is wrong or the total is off by $1.
Rounding errors.
Wow, do they have sense?
Good find.
That's what happens when you round it down.
Just $1, though.
So Eric did not see that, right?
I did make the mark, but I made the mark on this sheet.
No.
Yeah, okay. All right, so the next steps. So we are completing our background screenings and initiating some training. We're making offers. We're continuing our search for additional SRO candidates. You can see that. We will be a whole lot of coordinating with our local law enforcement partners as to what we would like to do and how we would like to be supported and interact with all of these agencies. And that's something that, and some of those things I was leaving till we had our police chief on board so he or she could go and coordinate with our law enforcement partners and work out the particular details of how operationally we conduct our day when things need to be coordinated. And so that obviously includes dispatching, how we dispatch, what we do, what we need, those kinds of things. And then the last part of it is Chief Tom Mattmuller in Venice PD has offered to help us with our property and evidence needs until we can get our own evidence room stood up for that piece. And that is a huge help to us. And Tom, I thank you greatly for that. And so we are working those details out with Chief Mattmuller in the Venice PD.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Welcome. Questions?
I'm sure there are many, so go ahead, Mrs. James.
Well, I just want to thank you, Michael Andreas, for your hard work. And I know you've been working night and day, and I hope you're going to take some time off for the 4th of July holiday at least to get some much-needed rest. And I want to thank our partners that are here today for coming here. I'm sorry that we were delayed in having you at the podium, but we so appreciate your help. We so appreciate your working with us and look forward to this next year of getting these things started. So thank you.
Mrs. Zucker.
I also would like to thank you. From listening to the superintendent, it's been a pleasure for him to deal with you. And your offer of help, and it's been truly an offer of help. And it's greatly appreciated. And especially in a time of need that we're in right now and trying to put it all together, you have been there and you have been extremely helpful. And Venice in particular, when he was so excited when he called about the contract with the agreement with Venice. So thank you very much.
Mrs. Brown.
I just want to reiterate, I mean, this wasn't something we decided to do on the fly, that we were even considering doing. Well, maybe somebody was considering doing it a few years ago too. But what happened at Parkland and the legislation that came down, I mean, it kind of put us in this position. And I think because of some things that happened there, we had a bumpy start, and lost some trust or some communication there. But it seems to me that, we've got open lines of communication now. We're going to be working. One of the impediments to the communication was not having a police chief, a law enforcement officer there. We're going to have that. And again, you look at the numbers of sergeants to officers. Well, I think we're 1 to 6. And the sheriff was 1 to 4, and I think we've got something working out with the police departments too. So, I looked at that too, and I'm like, why do we have so many supervisory people? But in discussions with the sheriff this morning, I think I got a better idea of why we have that and why we need that. Especially with the requirements that they have to also work with DCF and all these other groups, I know you've been working sort of round the clock. Keep that up. But thank you for bringing this forward.
Mr. Robinson?
I do want to point a couple of things out. I have the opportunity to go to Booker High every so often. I try not to because my wife doesn't like every time Dr. Shelley takes my money. But the SRO there is so integrated and such a valuable resource, and he's able to use the kids in doing some things outside, helping him, with certain information of things that occur outside. So it's a really good symbiotic relationship, and I'm hoping that, I know, even though that we were able to look at some exceptions for particular schools, and I know that you guys work so well with there, and especially Sarasota High, but I do, because I'm a Venetian, pick up on Venice. I know we all go to high school graduations, but I'm lucky enough to go down to the Venice Elementary graduation since I've been on the board, and this time in particular, they had an award for the kids for writing. 5 different kids got an award for writing essays, and 3 of them wrote it on the SRO, Officer Hammond, now Sergeant Hammond. Just hearing those kids talk about the relationship, and I know Mike Andreas, we've talked about Sergeant Hammond, and talking about how he has touched those kids' lives, and I know whoever's going to take his place will do the same thing, but I also want to point out the great work that Officer Terry does at Venice High, that they really are connected with the kids. They really do know what's going on and know what the issues are, and I know I've seen Officer Terry sit down and talk to people, not waiting for an incident to happen, that Officer Terry, is very in tune to what is going on at the school, just like the SROs at Booker High. So I just want to thank each of you, and I'm sure the same thing, is occurring at Northport. So thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could just add to that.
Absolutely.
The City of Venice is obviously the smallest agency represented here. We have 2 public schools, Venice Elementary, Venice High School, and fortunately for us, it is pretty much on a campus. So having 3 SROs there is going to serve us very well. We actually started planning for that 3rd SRO back in December of 2017, when I was preparing this budget that was just approved last week. I was actually preparing for that SRO well before the February 15th incident. So we're committed. Since we are only 2 schools, 2 charter schools and 1 private school, I feel like if there's anything we can do is help them with property and evidence, we surely will. Just want to also add, though, that even though we are the smallest agency represented here, we are the home of the baseball, football.
Yeah. Which I believe you have a coin from Mr. Robinson Farm.
Yes, I do.
But who can remember that you took my coin?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can't argue with the small
I can
print.
add that I'm a graduate of Venice High. I don't think anybody else here is, but I am a graduate of Venice High.
Mrs. Zucker.
I just want to tell you all, you've all been part of Do the Right Thing, which hasn't been in existence now for 2 years, but there's money in the bank. So I'm going to be sending each one of you a check for your contributions that you had given us throughout the years. So there's money that's going to be dispersed to you. So not a lot, but enough. Thank you.
Mrs. Brown.
It's my hope, too, that when we transfer this and we take it all over, that, the officers, and maybe even the resource officers, would still be welcome on our campus. I would hope, to come in and maybe if they've got some reports to fill out or whatnot, and they need a place to do it, I would hope they could come to our school and park up there, or we've got a substation, any of those things that we can partner with you on in the future. We want to do it. I want to do it. I hope the rest of us do too. So that we want to keep the relationship going that we've got, because that's so important. That relationship has to be there. And when something does happen, when an arrest needs to be made, I'm sure we're going to be working together on those things. And when something happens, outside of the school, I know that the Manatee County Sheriff has a handle with CARE where they notify us if there's been an incident in the home the night before, the kids were taken out of the home, the parents had an arrest or something, that maybe we start even working on something like that where we're notified that there might be problems, and give this kid a little slack today. You might want to. You probably know about the handle with CARE that the sheriff has. I'd like to look at something like that too.
So I can't stress enough that this department will be highly integrated with our law enforcement partners. We cannot protect our schools without our law enforcement partners working synergistically. We need high efficiency to make sure that our schools are protected. And the school police department can't do it by itself. No one agency can. No one policy, no one procedure, no certain amount of money that we dump into schools can make our schools safe. It has to be a living, breathing partnership, and it will be that. It's the only way. And as I've said before, as I say here now, our goal is to have a national model. We'll get there. It's going to take a little time, within 2 years, and we need to do some new and innovative things. But absolutely, we want the officers on our campuses for a whole bunch of reasons. And then one of the things we're looking at, I don't mind saying now, one of the things we are, considering is maybe starting a Sarasota County School Security Task Force, if you will, and then where our law enforcement leaders and non-law enforcement leaders can address the issues and come together, and we can communicate that way. So it makes sense. It would be probably the first in the state to do that kind of stuff, but those are the kinds of things we're doing. We're moving quickly, we're getting things done, but we're not moving so fast that we trip over ourselves. We'll get there where we need to be, but it has to be, in order to be effective, highly integrated with our law enforcement partners.
I have a well, first I really appreciate the partnership, the candidness, the availability. You guys have invested a lot of time even here today, and I know a lot in the back end, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And I echo what was said earlier, is that we want to continue that partnership, and I really do appreciate that. I have a lot of questions, but I also want to be sensitive to your guys' time. So just from your end, because I'm looking through the budget that we got it yesterday. And while I'm glad we have it, I've raised concerns that we hadn't had a framework or plan in place to kind of guide us so that we could really vet that out so that we knew what we were getting into. And as a school district, my biggest concern is that we don't get blindsided by unforeseen costs, because that can dip into what our core competency is, and that's educating our students. And so I'm just looking at these numbers now, in depth. And so one of my questions was on liability exposure. Do you, in your respective staffs, have in-house counsel to assist you to avoid any litigation?
In the city of Sarasota, the city attorney's office actually has an attorney that works with us. Probably about 80% of his time is spent with the police department, so yes.
Okay.
Same goes for the city of Northport.
Okay.
City attorney.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because what I've raised before when we brought this on, this is a different kind of liability that we oftentimes, the school district would see, I think, compared to what I believe law enforcement, you have exposure to federal cases much more than you would for tort, and that is not covered under sovereign immunity. And as we have seen, any federal court cases can be extraordinarily expensive. And so that is one of my major concerns, to make sure that we are prepared on how to handle that, because that can wipe out reserves very quickly. The other part that I wanted to ask...
Before you leave that, I've kind of made eye contact with Mitzi and asked her to make her way to the podium. They've done some research on that issue. We're starting to get some quotes so that we can present options.
The liability?
To the board on the liability
That was my next
side.
question, okay.
Yes, that's exactly. We have been in conversations with Gallagher regarding either additional excess liability over and above sovereign immunity for district in its entirety, or specifically only for the police department as a separate policy outside of the normal insured policies that we have. So Lynn has obtained some quotes. The separate policy for just police is about $40,000 to $51,000. The overall excess liability coverage can be $150,000 or higher.
And what's that limit?
$3 million, I think.
Okay.
I'm not positive. I don't.
No worries.
I
No,
don't
and that
have
was
the
just,
quotes with-
when we looked
but
at the
Lynn has
cost
done some
analysis,
work on that.
there have been, and I raised that issue as far as comparing, what are indirect costs that we have to consider, because that's a big one, one that we haven't really addressed. And that's an occupational hazard of mine, to think about our liability, because it's the uninsured that can really hurt an organization in a tremendous way. And so I want to make sure everyone has a very clear sense of what that exposure is for a school district. And I'd love to compare that to what your respective agencies do from a limit standpoint.
And I actually had reviewed the sheriff's financial statements because they're a component unit of the Sarasota County Board of County Commissioners and their total CAFR. And when I was reviewing their liability or risk management components, they didn't list anything different than the county's self-insured limits.
Okay.
So it didn't sound like when I was reading their information they had a separate policy. They may, but I didn't read it in there.
And I haven't asked that of the sheriff's office either, so I just wanted to see what our expected costs and whether it was reflected in here or not, so it's not.
And it's not because it would be part of our self-insured fund.
Right, so, but just again, looking at the budget and making sure we're aware of that, so it could be anywhere from 40 to 100,000 in addition.
Probably.
Okay, on a 3 million. The other component is, I have a lot, but again, I want to be sensitive. I don't know if there are any additional questions that we wanted to get with the sheriffs, go ahead, or the chiefs, excuse me.
My question's probably directed to Mitzi. The sheriff mentioned something, and I have two. One of them being on when you're looking at that excess liability, you might want to check with what, other school districts are doing, and, and they've got that FISBIT thing, you might want to check with them to find out, because maybe if the whole state pools together on it, the costs are just suggesting. And the other one would be that the high-risk pension cost. I think the high-risk pension is like 3 times the cost of a
The FRS rates are substantially higher for high risk, yes. They are. They're like 20% contribution.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, that's why before we go through this, I mean, is there any questions? You guys have entire cities to run, so I don't want to keep your time. So unless there's any additional questions, thank you so very, very much for just the continued partnership, and you guys are wonderful. We're very, very blessed to have you in this community, so thank you so much.
Tell Denise I said hi. Tom.
I don't know, Michael and Mitzi want to come replace over here.
I think you're not getting it back. I think it's time to move on.
So, thank you for putting this presentation together. I don't want to. I know there's been a lot of positive movement here, so I don't want to rain on the parade. But my only concern is just that I feel like we just did this whole process reverse. This I feel like should have been the first step. I know we were moving fast, but I also think it gives us an opportunity to really vet it. That's our responsibility. I'm hoping that everything put in front of us is what we're going to stick to, because we are not in a position for surprises. That's just what fundamentally terrifies me. And I have fiduciary responsibility, as do every member of this board, to make sure that we know what direction we're going. And so my question would be, are you confident and committed that these numbers will not increase?
In a word, yes. If you go back to the original allocation, we are still within those original allocations. You got a staffing analysis, and then at the bottom it had a $250,000 line item for startup costs in the operating budget. And we are within that budget. So yes, as you look at these budgets, they are incredibly detailed. We have spoken with vendors. We are estimating the cost of baseball caps. And so I would tell you that there aren't a lot of remaining unknowns as we work to establish our police department.
Okay. Mrs. Brown?
What about dispatch? I mean, I think there was a reporter down south that was saying, oh, you've got to have your own dispatch, you've got to, and that's going to cost, and you have to have 4 officers, and...
Well, unfortunately, you just lost the people that we should ask that question to, because as you look, both the city of Sarasota and the city of Venice use a unified dispatch through the sheriff's office. The city of Northport made a decision to do independent dispatch so they could provide you some perspective on that decision-making process. Where we would like to end up is through centralized dispatch. We would like to participate in the sheriff doing the dispatching as he does for the city of Venice and the city of Sarasota. We are prepared, if necessary, to dispatch on our own, but I believe the starting point for that conversation is to say, what would it take for the sheriff to dispatch on our behalf? That is something that he does for both the city of Sarasota and the city of Venice. That's part of the services of his department. It's my understanding there's not a cost for those services to their department, but I also believe it's not a cost that he has contemplated for us as we sit there today. So there is a conversation that needs to be had, but our starting point, we would start at a request to the sheriff to dispatch on our behalf.
And that dispatch, I mean, because the system was purchased by the county, so it encompasses the cities also. So if we're another law enforcement, and like, what does the college, what does New College do? Do they have their own dispatch, or do they work with the sheriff?
Do you know the
Airport?
answer? I doubt he dispatches for New College
They do
or
not
the airport
dispatch.
or any of those.
No, the airport does not dispatch, the cities don't dispatch, and New College does not.
So do they work with the sheriff? Okay.
But he has the option of charging those people for dispatching. There was a time where he was talking about charging the city of Venice when the whole thing was going on down a couple years ago, when he closed the jail and things were a little tense.
Well, I think
so. That was an issue about whether he was going to charge them for dispatching or not.
Well, we're
But
working
he ended up not charging them, not because of the kindness of his heart, but more because of the dual taxation issue, which he really doesn't have with the school district. So
Well-
there's a dual taxation fairness issue of why he ended up not dispatching for some people. And
Well, I beg to differ. I think there is a dual taxation. I mean, the people who pay school taxes also pay, but, I don't want to get into that now, but I would think that, in the he talked about working with us and equity, and so I would like to be on an equitable basis with what we're charged from the sheriff as to how we, equitably treats the city. So I would hope that, that would be treated equitably across the board for us, and as he treats the cities and the New College.
I heard today, and I think whenever you start an initiative like this, when you strategically plan, you have to assess where you are, you have to see where you need to go, and how to get from A to B often lets you know how the steps we need to take. So the dispatch piece is something that I was leading that until we had our police chief on board, so the police chief could go to the sheriff and work those things out. But I'm very encouraged from what I heard today, and I believe that the sheriff and all of our law enforcement agencies are now on board to help us with all of that, and I think it makes a whole lot of sense. But there are operational pieces that just have to happen in a room where they can sit down and talk these pieces out. The 800 megahertz system is owned by the county. There's room for that on that system to add our police department on that. And then the agencies would have to give us access to their particular talk groups, their radio frequencies.
Exactly.
So we can work together for officer safety and for school safety reasons, and all of that can be worked out. I couldn't see why another law enforcement agency wouldn't want to share a frequency, because when an officer needs to turn his dial and get on a different frequency for a whole bunch of reasons, it makes sense. So I'm encouraged, and I think that we'll get there and we'll work out. We always have, the way I operate, so we always have three options. You have your optimal, and then you have where we are now, and then you have an assortment in the middle. And so we keep those to ourselves, and we try to get to the optimal, and if we can't get there, we're prepared to go another way.
But I think it's important that we apply lessons learned. We need to get in the room with the sheriff and work this out. It's not something that we can do in a workshop without his attendance and participation. It's certainly not something that I want to transpire through the media. Is we will sit down with the appropriate sheriff's office personnel and have a conversation specific to dispatch. We will update you when that conversation has taken place.
I have a question about the evidence room real quick. And did you want to, just because I know Venice was very kind to provide that to us, what would that incurred cost year 2, year 3 look like?
So we are getting some quotes to build our own evidence room. And so we are in the process of that. It's not an exorbitant cost for us.
Give me, if you have an idea.
So where we are with that is that we are getting quotes for that process, and so we are adjusting the size of that evidence room. We shouldn't have an enormous requirement for a whole lot of evidence, to be honest with you, particularly our elementary schools. We don't simply collect a lot of evidence at the elementary
So we'd have an evidence room on every site?
No.
Absolutely not. It'd be centralized here.
Centrally located at our operations.
The way you said it, elementary, I'm just picturing.
No, I'm just saying.
In year 1, unfortunately, your need for evidence is disproportionate to the high schools. And so there's not a lot of prosecutions that originate on elementary school campuses.
Okay,
And so our need is minimal in year 1. As kids get older, they get a little more mischievous. So as you move into middle and high schools, then you start to do some prosecutions and need to keep possession of evidence. I guess we'll leave it at that, won't we?
But there's some hard
Do we
that has to take
yeah, so
place
do we
at
have an
that room.
idea
It's
from
just
a
not room.
cost component of what that's?
So I would hate to go on record and have, in
Ballpark.
lowball it, and then you come back to me and say, wait a minute, you said,
I'm not, I mean, I'm being,
especially you, Eric. So
I got you. It's a
I am going to very respectfully decline the answer right now because we are just receiving some quotes on that, so.
I would think we would need facilities input also, because it would be modifying the
we have no
building or
concept of
location
range.
here.
Yeah.
Construction is the hardest thing for me to ever estimate because they are.
How big are we talking? I mean, that'll help me. I can probably.
A room probably the size of this piece you see right
Okay,
here.
thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's security and access is the determining factor. It's not just square footage.
No, you need sign in, sign out. I mean, it's a very
who can get
high
in and out.
legal. That's my.
Yep.
We need electricity, we need refrigeration in there, so.
No, Mr. Robinson and then Mrs. Brown. No, you wanted to speak on something before, and
Yeah, I'm still a little more than concerned about doing our internal police force, and especially when I saw the sheriff show up that he's willing to do the elementaries fully loaded for $63,000. That includes everything, without us having to worry about liability, without us having to worry about cars, without us having to worry about overhead, taking that all off our back and allowing the chief law enforcement officer, who's already doing a great job, to expand it. Still, I mean, today made me think even more about that than less. And I did ask him about dispatch today. I followed up. I asked the question, and then I followed up later about that, and it became clear that there are additional services that they provide that they're not going. I got from the conversation, the questioning, it made me think that there are additional services that they provide that they won't be providing. For example, I pressed the major when he was talking about 3 o'clock in the morning. Somebody on Snapchat, he was referring to us having basically a cyber crimes unit and having somebody being able to go and issue subpoenas to people and finding out where they live. I mean, this is those services and that infrastructure is large and huge, and getting that level of expertise and the economies of scale. We're going to have people doing that, and then they may only be able to have to do that once every other month. I mean, being able to have that infrastructure in place and ready for every other month really doesn't make sense when you have somebody who's the sheriff who has economies of scale and has a much bigger need, and he's going to be using those people, almost on a daily basis, and maybe the school will plug in every other day. I mean, after today, I feel stronger about us.
So there are
using using the sheriff's office than less, especially when I saw that. I mean, it's not just about numbers. Numbers are important, and so that clearly it's cheaper. But also, we know that they do provide a high level of service. There's no doubt about that. Our sheriff's office, and our city and municipal partners provide a high level of service. I haven't heard anybody say anything about the level of service that our existing law enforcement are providing. So when you couple the cost, service, and ancillary things that no one's thought about, it makes me think that, and especially when we're at 7.5% right now in the fund balance, when we have to do those extra things, we could virtually, I don't know if technical bankruptcy is the right word, we could end up being in a place where we're going to end up cutting from the classrooms in order to pay for that because we're already at 7.5% of reserves. You shake your head, but where are you going to get the money from? If the reserves are at the lowest it can be, we have additional costs. That's how the math works out. Math is math. That's why I like it. It's just a mathematical formula at that point. And so a year from now, when we're at that position and everybody's pointing at the legislature, we need to point the finger back at ourselves, because we're making decisions now that are going to affect us, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and are going to have an implication into the classrooms.
I know Dr. Bowden and Mrs. Brown, but did you want to respond to that?
Yes, and we've had this conversation before. We are not bringing you a budget that goes below a 7.5% fund balance. We're not doing it in 18-19, and we're certainly not doing it in 19-20. And so we have talked about our reliance on fund reserves in the 18-19 school year, and that being largely a dependence not on a school safety security conversation, but a conversation about collective bargaining and a decision that we made collectively to move money out of our savings account and into the hands of our employees. And so that was done as a group. It was decided on the night that we ratified that contract. You asked me directly what the impact on the fund balance would be, and those numbers have stayed true throughout the entire process. In regards to this police department, our schools are not seceding from Sarasota County. They are not seceding from the cities. Is that we are going to work in partnership with the PDs and in partnership with the Sheriff's Department, but we are going to take the lead on the school campuses. So much of this activity takes place on campus and off, but there is a net savings to standing up a police department, but that's not the overriding factor. The overriding factor is having a police department who has a unique mission. There is nothing else that drives this department other than the safety and security of our school sites, period. A solely laser-focused, singular focus. And so that's our decision. That has been the decision of the board. It has been staff's activity to uphold the commitments that we've made. Our budget is exactly within our allocations. Our projections remain the same. And I will tell you again, as I told you 2 weeks ago, I will bring you a budget for the 1920 school year that conforms to a board policy of a 7.5% fund reserve. You can mark this tape and you can play it back to me when we do budgets for next year.
Mrs. Brown.
Now I've added something to it, but I'll keep to. I know that before we had our last board meeting and we voted on this, we got a call from the superintendent that Monday. It was a week and a half ago. You know, before we pulled the trigger and went ahead with our police department and approved those things, superintendent wanted to work out a deal where it was 80-20. Wasn't that, it was 80-20, and we were going to go ahead with the SRD2s. I'm not sure why that blew up and there was no deal, but that was the answer we got. And I think some of it might lie right here with our board because, you know, someone went and either shared it with the sheriff or the newspapers, you know, that we had a deal. And I know when the reporter called me, I explained to the reporter, no, this is preliminary. We don't have a deal yet. But it gets in the paper, and the sheriff, I think rightfully so, gets aggravated and answers, well, we don't have a deal. I mean, so maybe if that hadn't blown up, and I think some of that is on somebody's shoulders here at the table. If that hadn't blown up, maybe we wouldn't be talking about our own force right now. But, I mean, there was one last chance before we pulled the trigger, and that got blown up. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But the evidence room, the only reason we need an evidence room is if we're going forward with a prosecution, somebody is being arrested. And I know that we're looking at doing some, that school to prison pipeline. We're trying to change that. I know we're getting pressure from NAACP and other groups to try to, you know, reverse that. And interestingly enough, I think one of the largest schools for having arrests was in the county where Parkland is. So it was like, why do we have all those arrests? And maybe that didn't make it safer. So that's why we would need an evidence room. And I know the legislature has said they want to be issuing citations. You know, so I hope that, yeah, we have an evidence room, but I really hope that evidence room stays pretty empty. And the third one that I have, which is a question, is the jurisdictional. And the sheriff brought it up too. Where will our jurisdiction end? I mean, will it end at the sidewalk? Or if we hear that there's something that's posted at 3 in the morning, you know, on somebody's Snapchat, will we have the ability to investigate that? Or do we call in the sheriff and it's one of our other partners?
So law enforcement agencies work with mutual aid agreements and other various binding agreements. And so we would sign on to the mutual aid agreement in this county, and we would establish other agreements with the other agencies as necessary. So let's take Venice, for example. When they have to investigate something outside of their jurisdiction, they do it in collaboration with the Sheriff's Department, as do the other law enforcement agencies. We would still need to do the same things. We need the Sheriff's Department. We need Venice, Sarasota, and Northport PDs to work collaboratively. These kids just don't live inside the confines of our school property, so we have to have agreements that work with our other law enforcement partnerships, and so we can conduct investigations jointly as we move forward with these various needs. So I envision, and from what I heard today, that that would not be a problem, and it has to be that way. I don't know of an area where, and it doesn't make sense, civil leaders, particularly elected leaders, the community wants us to work together. And so the partnerships to protect the schools, I think wholeheartedly will go forward as necessary. So that is our chief sitting down with the sheriff and his representatives and figuring out what happens when we have this type of investigation. We send one of our officers, do you want one of your detectives to go? How we work that out, I've talked with the other agencies, and I know how they are doing some of those investigations, and we would look to do something very similar to get outside off of our campuses to conduct these investigations. And that is just the mutual aid that we need to have. And so we will move forward under that umbrella.
I feel bad because I feel like I'm going to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious. I just thought of something. So I'm kind of brace yourself. It's not that much. But how much do we spend, do you know, on recruiting for teachers? What's that budget look like?
$300,000.
And that's for the district-wide?
It is for the district-wide.
Okay. So I have a couple things to comment on, and then I guess we finalize. But Mrs. Brown, what you brought up, I'm glad you brought that up because I thought the same thing too. And what concerns me is that as of 2 weeks ago, there was, and I was very excited to hear that that was potentially an option, and then I'm very disappointed to hear that it wasn't an option. But and then today to hear that it is still an option, but clearly there was a willingness to go that way. And this is such a huge lift that we can't be making these decisions in spite of things. I mean, we're in public circumstance, and there are going to be articles written about pretty much everyone around this table. But this is too important of a conversation and too important of a topic to say, no, forget it, we're going to go down this route because of coverage. I mean, so I feel like today there was another offer provided. I thought it was very helpful. I'm still very concerned. I know this board majority wants to move forward. I am asking you if any of this concerns you from an unknown. And of course you can't guarantee it, but the part that I brought up about the liability, that scares me to death. And I don't know, because maybe it's because of what I've seen, but I know that, for example, the sheriff's office, they have 3 in-house attorneys to work through so it doesn't go to federal court. I don't think we've allocated that. That's why I asked that of the chiefs. Because this is an unknown territory that we have not dealt with. And now it's on us to make sure, and that could devastate our funds. That could devastate it. And we're in a very fortunate position in Sarasota, unlike many other counties. And so I just implore you to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what potentially could happen, because we do have the 7.5. Yes, what you provided, we're within that ballpark, but it's the unknowns that scare me. And I don't think we've allocated enough to mitigate that from a legal liability standpoint. And I feel I have a responsibility to just ask you to really think about that and consider it, because it has a fundamental impact on our ability to educate our students, to continue to be the highest paid, one of the highest paid counties for our educators, and that's what we're here to do. So I really want to make sure that everyone is confident and comfortable. I still have major reservations. I think maybe there's some restructuring that we could do that may work it, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that. And then to bring up what was mentioned before is that we were willing, there was 2 weeks ago, that there was a likelihood that we could potentially have scrapped the plan and gone with what we had done before, and then within a 24-hour cycle it changed. It shouldn't be about someone being frustrated about anything like that. It should be about making the right decision. And that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mrs. Zucker.
I'm concerned about us not having our own police force, because what happened was very deliberate. I mean, we did have an agreement that we would go 80-20, and it died. And it was a really good member of our community who brokered that deal. But that very same day, as we all agreed to it, when the superintendent called us individually, it went away. Why? Nobody knows. So it made me very, very unhappy. I was nervous when we went self-insurance, because that was a big liability we were taking. there's a lot of things that through the years that I've been concerned about that we've done. I mean, and then when we went through the recession and we had to make all of these cuts, that killed me because I was cutting people that I knew was important for our district and our kids. But these are decisions that you make as you go along, and it's always going to be this way. You're never going to have a perfect scenario. You're always going to be moving forward and taking the opportunities and doing your best and making your best judgment based on the needs of your students and your knowledge of what you know. You have to have trust in the superintendent. You have to have trust in your staff. And I have that trust. And I guess maybe that makes the difference because I trust what you all are doing. I know you work 70, 80 hours a week, and I'm sure Mitzi's right there with you. And I know this guy calls me at 9 o'clock at night. So I know all of you are putting in all of these hours and you are working. I cannot see us failing. I really cannot see us failing. If I could, or if I had any inclination that we would fail, I would not do this. But I don't. I'm secure. I'm secure with you all and with myself and how I come to my decisions.
Mrs. Goodwin.
You know, the will of the board is always important, and we speak for the board, and once we've made a decision, and we move on, and we don't go back and revisit this 100 times. So for me, once we made that decision several weeks ago, I look forward, not backward, and I trust our superintendent, and I trust our staff, and I know Mr. Hardy and the legal side of things will come forward and be worked out. I know that other school districts are looking at this as well. And I think for the sake of our students, let's go back to our students. I think having our own force, having a greater safety and security mission, I mean, it's become a real mission today. How can students learn if they can't feel safe? This is the option that I feel we need to exercise. I don't have a personal relationship with the sheriff that I would say would give me a comfort. I know that a couple of you do, and I think that's wonderful. But I have a relationship with our staff, and I have a relationship with our superintendent,